us are still in the same place, but the Earth is gone.
Exterminate! Welcome to my new empire.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are at war.
Exterminate Torchwood!
I'm sorry!
The doctor is coming!
He's dying, and you know what happens next.
You can't. What do you mean, what happens next?
I'm regenerated. Welcome once again to the Tin Dog Podcast, and welcome to the very end of Season 4, or Series 30, as usual depending on which side your fan bread's buttered. Now, as you know, I probably talked quite a lot about last week's show, but as I like to do both shows as a combination, keeping both two parts of a two-parter together, I hope you don't mind if I go over some of the ground I covered last week. But before I do, I just want to say that this week's show is dedicated to Peggy Pollett of Illinois, USA. Thanks for donating to help the Tin Dog Podcast keep running. And also, I wouldn't mind saying, or at least recommending, that you check out Stephen Fry's podcast. As his latest edition, he talks about watching Doctor Who as a child, and also about the future direction of the BBC. So if even remotely you're interested in the history of British television, you track that down and give it a listen. I think it's on iTunes. But enough nonsense, on with the review of The Stolen Earth. This is one of 4 back-to-back stories, all written by Russell T Davies. Now we know he's leaving, but he's not leaving till the end of 2009, which means the Christmas special and several others may be written by him. And so after 4 years, you might imagine that you're starting to see someone's ideas dry up. However, if these 4 stories are anything to go by, that couldn't be further from the truth. For many people watching, The Stolen Earth is the highlight of the entire season. It's the exciting episode where we get to see all of the toys put out before us, all ready for the end game. And like many things in life, the journey is so much better than the destination. But we'll talk about episode 2 shortly, but not yet, because for 1 week, all we could think about was this one story. Yeah, we'd grown sick of the Daleks, turning up every series, and I know they're iconic, and I know that the BBC had been granted permission to use the rights by Terry Nation's estate for 5 years, which probably means they may appear next year in one of the specials, before the rights have to get bought back once again. 18 months ago we'd had perhaps the most disappointing of all Dalek stories. The Daleks Take Manhattan, or whatever it was really called, didn't quite ring true, and from that story the only surviving Dalek was Dalek Khan, complete with his missing panels, using temporal emergency shift and running away just in time to rebuild yet another Dalek empire. At the time we felt we'd seen most of it all before, but here we had something new, something great. We had payment for all of that invested time and, in many cases, money into the programme. Here we were beginning to see the summing up of storylines that were begun almost 4 years ago. We weren't just playing with the toys. We had Captain Jack, we had Sarah Jane, we had the ex-Prime Minister, and if you weren't paying attention and you hadn't been watching and you just turned up for the finale, for a start, where have you been? But more importantly, I don't think we cared. You see, we had been watching. We had been paying attention. We'd been making mental notes. We knew who was where. We've seen all of the spin-offs. And we were just happy. And like all good two-parters, we were given a big list of questions. Questions that we knew at some point may or may not, but probably would be answered And of course there was that highly annoying, emotional journey that Rose has been on. Yeah, I know I'm on record as saying that I didn't really want Rose ever to come back. And you know, I still kind of feel that way. One of my great reasons for loving Donna's relationship with the Doctor is that there was no romance. Even the whole thing of, no, we're not a couple, was beginning to get on my nerves. Because we didn't care. Donna was a Doctor Who fan. And that, of course, will be the downfall I'll discuss later on. The bees, the planets, the thing on Donna's back, all were coming together marvellously. The Shadow Proclamation, admittedly, was a bit of a disappointment. In our heads, I'm sure the place looked a lot more like the Imperial Senate in Star Wars, or something slightly more ethereal, something from the faction paradox end of things, rather than looking like, well, the basement in his swimming baths. As for the Doctor speaking Jadoon as soon as he walks through the door, well, it allowed for a nice comic moment, and let's not bother with the whole translation circuit nonsense. Whenever the Jadoon talk, all I can really hear them say is,
"Oh no, brown cow!"
And I hasten to say that that wasn't my entry into the Whocast's Can You Impersonate an Alien competition, although given that they only had the one entry, I must admit I wish I'd sent that in. Crashing on. Apparently, there were plans to have many alien races as part of the Shadow Proclamation, and indeed they had recorded some rather interesting sound effects and speeches made by some Raxacorico Phalapatorians, so I for one am kinda glad they were omitted, in favour of albino women with slightly psychic tendencies and cups of water. Yeah, we've got the Donna's heartbeat thing, we've got some more questions, we've got the bees, which I'm sure I covered last week, and a whole host of other questions. Was it just me, or were you expecting the Jadoon to turn up at the end and try and sort of save the day in episode 2? Yet another example of us being wrong-footed, I guess. Of course this story wasn't perfect. How come Torchwood don't use any of the alien guns they've got lying around? How ropey was that radio effect coming out from Earth towards the TARDIS? And also when the TARDIS travelled, is it me, or have they put in some wobbling into the effects? We didn't mind it wobbling in the 70s, but this really isn't the 70s anymore. The TARDIS doesn't have to wobble while it travels, even if that is a nod to Classic Who. There are certain nods we don't really need. Before I move on, I just want to ask one question. How many people out there tried, just secretly, ringing that number to see if you could get through to the Doctor? You might have, in passing, in the pub, sent a text message to it. Well, you wouldn't have got through because obviously the guy was in an alternative universe where they don't have coverage. So that's why you couldn't get through. See? Obvious. Not that Ofcom supplied a number that no one would have or anything like that. That would just be silly. See, I made it through that entire thing without mentioning Clom. I can't leave my review of episode 1 without mentioning how great Dalek Khan had become. That wonderful, giggly, prophesying voice, played wonderfully up against the deeply evil and fantastically acted Davros. Julian Bleach, or Bleach, is it Bleach? I guess it is Bleach, managed to find a wonderful midpoint between Wisher and Malloy. The cool, calm, calculating scientist of Wisher and the completely insane Malloy. Truly, truly great. Which brings us, of course, to that end, that cliffhanger, that wonderful moment that sold us on a nice little goose chase, where I, for one, was quite willing to believe that we'd been tricked into having a regeneration scene. Now, I'm not sure when David Tennant will leave, but an actor like that really can't stay in one place forever, and with only a few extras next year, and then a switch to high definition, I don't know what's to come. But at least we'll have him till at least next Christmas. And as we always know, Christmas is a great time for rebirth, regeneration, and other such things.
The ending approaches. People and planets and stars will become dust. And the dust will become atoms, and the atoms will become nothing. This is my ultimate victory. The destruction of reality itself!
I just want to quickly mention that the Tin Dog podcast will not be ending as I originally intended after the end of Season 4, but will merely move to a fortnightly release schedule rather than the weekly release schedule we've had for the last year and a bit. I intend covering a host of new topics, some of which you've suggested via email, and many of which will be reviews of forthcoming DVDs and parts of the classic series. I'd also like to thank everyone who's been leaving great feedback on iTunes. Thanks. I've given a lot of thought to how I could possibly review this episode, and I think the best way of doing it is to work methodically through Dalek Khan's prophecies, because I for one think we've been a little bit shortchanged. You see, the overall narrative works very much like old classic Doctor Who, and more importantly, like New Who, by which I mean the plot's fantastic as long as you don't think about it too much. Now that's hardly a new thing when it comes to Doctor Who, so it's probably best if we just skate over it. I mean, we have wonderful concepts, like Bernard Cribbins shooting the Dalek with the paintball gun, which for me was completely inspired. The Osterhagen key was obvious in many respects, but still a very, very nice concept. The idea of the Doctor finding out his true self wasn't truly a surprise to anyone. The threefold man couldn't possibly have been thought of by a fan just watching the programme trying to fit things together, because in all honesty, it didn't really seem to make that much sense. And here we have a two-Doctor story where both Doctors are the same actor. Now this is where a little theory of mine kicks in. I don't think David Tennant really intended staying as long as he has. But the guy's a fan, the guy's really enjoying himself, and he wants to stay, and he's being provided with some fantastic opportunities to act. And so with this in mind, he's decided to stay. But bear with me for a moment and imagine the story as David Tennant's last. The Doctor is shot by a Dalek and begins to regenerate. Into the 11th Doctor, residual energy escapes and goes into the hand. A similar story to the one we're presented with continues, but with an 11th Doctor, Rose being deeply upset, and then the hand becomes the 10th Doctor. The rest of the episode could have played out perfectly similarly, with two Doctors, one, Dr. 10B, the human Doctor, being played by Tennant, while the 11th Doctor, a brand new actor, gets to act out the entire rest of the narrative. He's the one who has to sort out the issue with Donna, but at the very end, our 10B Doctor gets to go off with Rose. It's a good ending to her storyline. It's nice to know that she won't come back, and it's even better to know that if ever there is a 15 Doctors story in the future, or another multiple Doctor story at some point, the fact that David Tennant will look older will be fine, because Dr. 10B is human and will age. It's a lovely little idea, and one that'll work marvellously. But Dr. 10, Dr. David, is still with us, and thus we end up with one of those nice same actor playing two parts kind of a storyline. This episode was 20 minutes longer than its usual counterparts, but narratively, the exciting part of the story was still over in its classic 45-minute slot. The remaining time was just sewing up all of the dead ends. Towing the Earth back to its original position looked and felt just plain wrong. It would have been slightly better for me if the TARDIS had materialised around the entire Earth and then moved it, rather than giving that lovely drag coefficient as the planet moved faster than the speed of light. Yeah, I know, all of the physicists amongst you wince whenever something like that gets mentioned, but let's face it guys, we're watching Doctor Who. It's best if we just leave it there, isn't it? And before I discuss the very end of the story, I just want to mention that calling it a reality bomb just didn't make sense to me. A reality wave or wave of destruction, fair enough. But on board the Death Star, I mean Crucible, I mean Bogue Ship, oh you know what I mean. The fact that it was filmic, but happened to look like several other things that we'd seen before, you could really easily let go. But what is Davros's motivation, apart from being a complete Fruit Loop? Okay, Davros is mad, and wants the Daleks to be the only surviving creatures in the universe, but surely the Daleks want to subjugate, not replace. I know there's that whole thing in Genesis of the Daleks where Davros is given the conjecture that he could have created a virus that would end up being the only living thing in the universe. So has the Doctor given Davros the idea to kill absolutely everyone? It just doesn't make sense to me. Also, keeping everyone on Earth alive are just in order to invade one estate on Earth and kidnap one lot of people. Oh, I'm so sorry, they do go to Germany, and that business with the German Daleks is simply lovely. It reminded me of the old Dalek annuals where they used to talk about all the great things Daleks could do, like one Dalek could power New York for 1,000 years or something, and Daleks had a database of 4 billion gazillion languages. It was all completely made up and absolutely glorious. Congratulations, I've rambled. Have a drink. And so, finally, on to the end of this season. Rose finally gets her replacement doctor. They all go off to Bad Wolf Bay and apparently live happily ever after in that terrible blue suit. Rose has a baby kid brother called Tony, which doesn't really make that much sense name-wise, but hey, her dad's called Pete, so let's let that go. Perhaps the T in Russell T Davies is just Tony. Yeah. I'm so glad that we didn't actually hear the Doctor say, "I love you," but that's the old Doctor Who fan in me. The new fan of things like Buffy and even Star Trek really wouldn't mind. The old school fan in me was so glad it was whispered, because it could have been anything, although I know in my heart it really wasn't. And then we abandon them to their own future and get on with the actual plot. We knew Catherine Tate was leaving. Catherine Tate is by far my favourite of the new Who companions. She has proven us all so wrong. She has taken an annoying character who by its very virtue was annoying and turned her into something wonderful. I know we were promised a death, and I, for one, really expected Donna to die. Not just have her memories removed, but are we just the sum of our memories? A Time Lord even more so? Donna is transformed into the Donna from the runaway bride, and that is a punishment kind of worse than death if you're a cynic, but not really. Her relationship with her family will evolve and change and probably make her a better person. She may not remember the facts, but the person she was will definitely ooze through. Donna is a Doctor Who fan, and can you imagine your life with all of the Doctor Who-ness taken out? It's still not exactly death, is it? It's just not as much fun. I, for one, will genuinely miss Donna, but we have Christmas to look forward to. Christmas and The Wrong Cybermen. The Wrong Cybermen is not an Aardman animation. It's just, I don't quite understand where these Cybermen have come from if they're in Victorian England. Thus begins an enormous bit of conjecture that'll last at least 5 months until Christmas rolls around. So, if you've only been listening to this show while Doctor Who's been on the air, thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you at Christmas. If, however, you've enjoyed the Tin Dog podcast and want to stick with me right through till Christmas, I'll speak to you all very, very shortly. Be seeing you. You have been listening to the Tin Dog podcast. Doctor Who and its associated shows are all trademark of the BBC. No infringement is intended. Contact us at tin-dog@hotmail.co.uk.